Jeff, I'm a little concerned that we have a Superman problem. Now, we already talked about Superman last week.
Yes.
I'm not saying that Ari Aster's Eddington has anything deliberately to do with Superman, but I have the same problems with this new A24 art house film that I did with Superman 2025. And we're going to get into all of that in spoilerific detail in the next 45 minutes, hour, maybe 7, who knows, because I have a lot to say about this, and I know you do too. We are not fans of this movie, if I might spoil it for the audience, but high level, Jeff, what did you make of Eddington? Am I crazy?
No, I don't think you are. In fact, I hate to say this because I had a little bit of the same problem with this one that I have with all of Ari Aster's work, and that is I am sort of buying into it for a while, and then I think he takes some really crazy turns that take me out of the film, frustrate me as a film goer, let alone a critic, and ultimately ending up making me feel either manipulated or alienated. And I think the same happened here. My high level thought on this one was, at first I thought, wow, this is almost feeling like a sort of modern Twilight Zone episode. In fact, it reminded me a little bit of the Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, that famous episode with the neighborhood kind of going crazy when suddenly all the electricity goes out and then one person's car randomly starts and the boy tells it, well, this is how the aliens are going to invade us when they come down here from Mars. And where'd you read that? In a comic book. But suddenly everybody then takes that as, gospel, and pretty soon they're all accusing each other of terrible things, and then it just descends into violence and accusations and viciousness. And I thought we were going there because it's kind of a subtle, slow burn at first. Like there's lots of little things that are happening that are starting to kind of build up with tension and characters getting kind of frustrated. But then I think almost about halfway through, maybe 2/3 of the way through, and we can talk about this as we get into it, but when there's a couple of assassinations that happen, I felt the film went off the rails, and I thought it was out of character for the person who did the assassination. I thought the rest of it just became kind of this dumb sort of cover-up story, and then it just got more silly and silly, where I thought there was a lot of interesting thoughts about how people are uncertain of other people's motivations or histories, and then with the crisis of the pandemic, which is this, of course, is the backdrop for this film, that is understandable and legitimate. But I think it went way too far with that until I was just shaking my head and kind of wanting it to be over. I think Oster's he's good with actors. I think he has certainly a certain flair for the dramatic. I think he picks topics and goes into subjects that are a little bit intense, whether it's like family dysfunction and hereditary, or, sort of college age dysfunction in Midsummer, or, just small town kind of, having to sort of cope with bigger issues that they normally don't have to deal with. But then I think his conclusions, or his almost sneering at his characters, becomes very off-putting, and I ultimately walk out feeling like he's very cold and kind of laughing at me or everybody else out there, rather than sort of sympathizing and maybe saying, I understand, but you've kind of let it go. Like, I think, for example, just to bring it back to Serling for a second, I think Serling was always like, this really shouldn't be us. These people who are doing bad stuff, we're better than this, but too often we'll take the path of least resistance. I think Aster seems to be laughing like, well, this is who we are today. We're just awful human beings. And we're kind of powerless to do anything about it. And that the last 10 minutes of Eddington, I think is garbage. I mean, it just really pissed me off. It's like, I also think he could have lopped that whole section off. I don't think that was necessary. I think it was adding insult to the injury, but we'll get into all of that. So I walked away from this one with a very unsavory taste in my mouth, I hate to say. No, because I wanted to like it. I like a lot of cast members, and I know he's got talent as a filmmaker, Aster does, but I just think he goes too far with all this stuff.
Yeah, and that's, we're simpatico there. I really didn't like the last 10 minutes. I didn't like the second half of the movie because it does take a very distinct turn.
Yes.
I respect the fact that once it makes the turn, Aster punctuates it. It's kind of like, again, for those who have not seen Superman 2025, you might not know what I'm talking about, but there is a scene in that movie involving the message from Superman's Kryptonian parents. Mm-hmm. And as the audience, you're sitting there thinking, well, that message is clearly been manipulated, or there's
Mhm.
going to be an interpretive reveal later on
Right,
that
right.
changes how we feel about this revelation. But it not only is it true according to the movie's logic, it is
Mhm.
doubled down and reinforced throughout.
Yes.
So you're
Mhm.
like, oh, I guess this is just where we are now. Uh, there is a homicide that happens in the middle of Eddington, the town and the movie. Um, and it's like, oh, okay, that's really different and shockingly violent and tonally kind of askew from what we've seen. But then it is immediately followed up by 2 assassinations, and that is Aster saying, "No, this is where we are now. I'm not. This isn't some cute little thing. We're going to go back to the poorly written cultural satire. We're turning this into a knockoff Coen Brothers, like No Country for Old Men type of actioner slash psychological
Mhm.
drama, whatever." And I appreciate that as far as a director making a statement. I don't appreciate where he goes with the movie, because I feel like everything that he set up, I feel like he set up clumsily, but at least it felt like he was going to try and say something. But then that's
Mhm.
all left by the wayside, cultural commentary wise, to this cover up, a man trying to cover up what might have been an impulsive action that then
Mhm.
evolved into a homicidal proclivity, and then ended up being sort of his downfall and political resurrection. Again, folks, this
Well
is,
said. That
thank
was
you.
really well said. It's
Well,
like,
thank you.
yeah, it makes it sound smarter than it is.
Well, but and honestly, all the material in this movie, I think you could have come out with a different version of the movie that kind of does make use of all this stuff, but it's just not
Mhm.
this script. And it's strange because the first half of the film, which I didn't like, but I appreciate, like, Aster's doing something a bit different here. I did not see Beau is Afraid, so I can't
Mhm.
comment on that. But it felt different than Hereditary. It felt different than Midsommar. It felt like, okay, he's going to do something more down to earth. He's not giving into like
Mhm.
shocking violence. But then
Mhm.
when that happens, I'm like, oh, that's right. I'm watching an Ari Aster movie.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's funny too, because I think what he does really well in the first, say, hour of the film, even if I think there's a lot of things that we can get into that aren't good. Like, I think he simplifies certain problems of that era. You know, this it's May of 2020, and it's about to get into the sort of lockdown. Everybody has to wear masks, part of the COVID era, and it seems a little crazy in a arid Arizona town. And particularly when the sheriff, who has asthma, has trouble breathing already, and he's already kind of being put upon because he's got a troubled marriage, and he's living with his mother-in-law because, you know, they are supposed to just sort of stay together now, even though he doesn't like her and she's in his way. And his wife and the mother-in-law both are sort of given to conspiracy theories, and, you know, spending a lot of time online as slowly but surely their world has become shrinking as they stay in. But you know, the mayor, whose name is Joe Cross, played by Joaquin Phoenix, in a very disciplined performance, I think, from
he's
him. I
he's
mean,
the sheriff.
he's the sheriff. I
Yeah.
think he was very
Yeah.
sympathetic and kind of sad and sweet in the for the first part of the film, is trying to kind of keep the peace in the town. But then he gets a little bit mad and a little bit miffed by all these kind of bad people, or all these kind of people kind of treating him bad, yelling at him. There's a bunch of white teenagers out there protesting the George Floyd stuff. And I think his Ari Aster's read on that is a little simplistic too, and for the sake of the film, but he's kind of being an equal opportunity satirist here, because he's making fun of, you know, the white privileged people who still use that white privilege to take up these calls and these protests and act like they're, you know, Abby Hoffman reborn. But you know, you're getting a little bit of sense of, okay, if his message is that most of Americans were not really ready for this dramatic thing that happened, and they weren't. I think the world wasn't. And I will say this, I don't know how you felt about it all politically, but the one thing I will say, as not an excuse, but kind of an explanation, if I dare say, about COVID is, you know, for everybody who says, well, we wore masks too long, we were locked down too long, we kept kids from school, you're probably right. I mean, I think in a lot of those instances, we were probably being better safe than sorry and all that. The one defense I will say about all that, I think there's a little bit of that applied to this film, Ian, is that I don't think we knew exactly So we did err on the idea like, well, shit, maybe it is airborne. Maybe it'll get to us. Maybe we need to wear masks outside, even though we're in the open air. And that seems a little crazy. In front is 6 feet going to be different from 12 feet? I don't know, but that's where we all standing in line 6 feet away for a couple months. But he's sort of making a little bit of fun of that, and I think he's doing that through this prism, sort of, if you will, of this very small town that's in the middle of nowhere in Arizona. It looks like it's kind of an abandoned town too, like maybe they've seen better years, like there's businesses that aren't thriving, and even the businesses that look like they're still in existence, there's no customers because everything is takeout or carry home, and the bars aren't even allowed to be open. And I remember what that was like, and it was scary and it was weird, but everybody was like, is this, I mean, who knows is this the bubonic plague, or, it turned out to be not as bad as we thought, but, a number of millions of people did die through the world. So it was bad for a while, but then it becomes about everything. It becomes about cults. It becomes about sexual inadequacy. It becomes about, jealousy. It becomes about racism. It becomes about sexism. It becomes about generational discourse and political discourse. And he's throwing everything into the mix. And then it becomes, to your point, this very violent, almost kind of Coen Brothers, like, how did it get to that point? But, in No Country for Old Men, which is also kind of a modern Western in this kind of way here, you've got a hitman who's looking for drug money. Those are bad people. You're not going to expect anything less from Anton Sugar when he's been asked to retrieve these millions of dollars in a satchel, and he's taking out the people who want to steal it from his bosses. Here, suddenly everybody's getting out the heavy artillery and they're shooting at each other, and it's like Rambo almost at the end. And it's like, I just think that is an overread of what was a real problem in 2020, a real batch of some good errors, some good judgments, some really bad errors in judgment. And now that we were 5 years past it, we can look back and go, yeah, the monsters are doing Maple Street escalated a little bit to where it didn't need to be, including, how dare you not wear a mask, and you're a bad person because you're not wearing a mask, and, well, I have my rights and blah, 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 freedom. It's all kind of there, but then I think he misses that and goes into, Black Lives Matter and white privilege and cults and Me Too, and it's just everything, and it wasn't really all that during that time, and I don't think this should be that either, because I think it takes the focus off what is this small town having to deal with an extraordinary circumstance that they're not really ready for. Nobody in the country, nobody in the world probably was, but in a small town like this where there's not a lot that happens and it's kind of sleepy, it was too much. But then everything is too much in this film.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2020 is a lot to take in as far as, drama or comedy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember there are times when, that phrase, the new normal, was everywhere for probably a good couple of years.
Yeah.
And folks sincerely asked, like, is there going to be a point now where we're going to watch TV and movies and everyone's going to be masked from now on? Because this is just like, we're never going to get, we always have to wear masks from now on.
Yep.
I feel like it needed to be handled either as a mini series, as we say about so many films nowadays. This could have been, you could have taken, just call the mini series 2020, have it be 12 episodes.
Yeah.
And you have 1 month, January to December, to cover the year.
That's a better idea.
Because there was a time pre-COVID. And it's not until like March, that's when they really started sending people home. And then by May of 2020, by late May, when the George Floyd thing happened, one of the reasons that everyone was so excitable and, riotous was because they've been cooped up.
Yep.
And the
on edge already.
Right. The injustice of the act was the spark, but it was the being cooped up and all that other stuff that was the flame. But even there, you've got these political conversations that people were trying to have, and a lot of them got shut down. Like, wait a second, we are allowed to go out and protest, but we can't go to church. Those are all shut down. We can't gather in large numbers unless it's to protest racial injustice. Things that you still understand, or that don't make sense. And much like with Superman, raises a lot of really interesting issues at the beginning of that film, as far as like, what does a superhuman being, what is his responsibility to the people of the earth and all this other stuff. It was like, wow, that's the opening 10 minutes of your movie. I can't wait to see where the next 2 hours goes. And it doesn't go anywhere, because you've got the Justice Gang and Lex Luthor and the dog and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
This film, I feel like, if the big problem is that Aster takes the plot of a convoluted family drama and then superimposes the pandemic on top of it. And you can't have a movie unless you're a very deft screenwriter, and he is not. You have to pick one or the other. Okay.
Yeah.
And the idea of like, oh, interesting, how would a family already at odds deal with the fact that now that there's this pandemic, but you basically have Emma Stone, the wife character, she's in all of like maybe 5 scenes, I feel like.
Yeah.
And most of them she's like on the bed or sitting at the table or whatever, and then she runs off with this cult leader, and like, well, what is this?
Where'd that come from?
Right. I mean, it'd be interesting to see a family drama about a couple who's having problems, and they're forced to stay inside and deal with it, because they used to deal with by going out and carousing or working late at work, that kind of stuff. But that's not what this movie is. And I hate kind of armchairing, like rewriting it. But while I was watching the movie, I'm like, I don't understand why I'm watching what I'm watching or how I'm supposed to care. And also none of it makes sense. I'm glad that you brought up the whole idea of this sleepy town that's kind of fallen on hard times and there's nobody around. That's fine, but it's something that I almost have to infer, or it's in like little snippets of dialogue that are parts of other themes that are going on.
Right.
Because there are stretches in this movie where there's a Black Lives Matter protest and there's like 6 people show up, and then other people show up, but the whole big melee is like maybe 20 people. And at the end, where the entirety of this downtown sleepy little New Mexico town, there's people being shot and machine guns going off and people exchanging fire. I'm like, where is everybody? It looks like they're shooting on the back lot.
And you think people would hear this and wonder, or turn the lights on or something, or run on the streets and be scared, or like, are we under attack from whatever it is that's attacking? And we don't really entirely find out. They say that it's Antifa at the end, but we don't know who the gunman is, constantly aiming his sights on the Joe Cross sheriff that Joaquin Phoenix plays. It's funny too, because to your very point about rewriting it, I like the idea that either you go longer with this and you tell us a sort of interwoven story of all these different kind of pieces, sort of connecting and all that, or you have to go simpler. Like, I think what would have been interesting is, okay, so maybe the sheriff doesn't have a very good marriage with his wife, and for whatever reason, it's kind of run its course, and maybe she's bored with him, or maybe he's too quiet, or his job takes him away, or whatever it is. And maybe it's exacerbated because the mother's there and she's kind of nagging and a problem too, and maybe she's working on her daughter against the husband. That's enough. And then they're stuck at home with each other and they can't leave. They can't move. So they're stuck in this house and there's all this tension and all that kind of stuff. I know a couple of people who went through that. There was one couple that I know that were going to get divorced. And because of all the stuff with the lockdown, they had to end up staying together for another 6 months. And that was as much torturous as having to wear any mask or anything like that out in the public if they went out in public to get groceries or whatever. So, that's Ari Aster, a simple enough backstory on Joe Cross. But then they have his political opponent, the man who's the mayor of the town, supposedly dumped the wife when he was dating her. And then Joe makes a political ad that says she was raped by the Ted Garcia, the mayor, played by Pedro Pascal. And it's like, wait a minute, where is this coming from? And now, is this true? And is that where this story is going? But then there's a couple of other characters like Ted Garcia's son, who's kind of interested in this attractive teenage girl who suddenly decides to become strident, and she's going to be, out there protesting for all of the beleaguered people in the world. And, this other guy is trying to get involved with her because he likes her too. So he's sort of taking on that mantle of sort of, okay, I'll be awakened to your cause because I'm interested in you. And so you have that going on. And then there's, we have a black deputy, and whether or not he's going to, get promoted, and it suddenly it's like there's it feels
And
like we're just putting too many coats of paint on this story, you know.
well, on top of that, the black deputy um, was dating this
That's
girl that is in
right.
the middle of this triangle. And
That's
when
right.
we first see these kids, they're like hanging out on the football field of the high school.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, are these high school kids? But then I guess it's later implied that they might be 21 or just out of high school. And I
Right.
hope that's the case because this sheriff's deputy is like in his 20s. And
Yeah.
later on, when he's asked about it, he's like, we barely knew each other. I'm like, okay, so
Right.
is the movie lying to me or is this guy lying to me? Because this guy is being presented throughout the film as being, trustworthy, kind of like
Right.
questioning some of the wilder decisions being made around him. But I don't know what the deal is. And then we show him as being, he's out there with automatic weapons, like target shooting and stuff, which makes it easy to set him up as a
Oh,
patsy
yes.
with this whole thing. Like the whole Ted Garcia thing with the mayor, if you take out the whole, I dated the sheriff's wife and there's this whole like sexual abuse allegation, and then the mayor's second wife, she disappeared. That's a whole mystery that's kind of like set up but never goes anywhere. Did she leave? Is she, I guess she left, but I don't
Right.
know. The movie doesn't care, so I don't either. The whole combativeness between Ted Garcia and Joe Cross, or part of it is there is a corporation that wants to set up an AI data center
Right.
on the outskirts of town.
Yep.
And that's going to be great for, tech and business, but it's also going to be draining the energy and water and natural resources of the area or something. So it's set up as this political fight. But because the town is so small, you never get the sense that people are really incensed about it. Or if there is a big fight in the town, it's like 3 people versus 2 other people bitching about it. Like you don't
Right.
get the sense of like, what does this mean? And what is this movie about? And what does it have to do with COVID? Now,
Yep.
but
Exactly.
before we can get into resolving any of that stuff, again, spoilers if you haven't seen Eddington. The movie opens with a guy. Is it Clifton Collins? Does he play the vagrant who's kind of wandering into town? I felt
I'm
like
not
that was
sure.
him.
I can look it up. I don't know. That's right. There was the kind of, dare I
Oh, yep.
say, for short hand. He was kind of a crazy homeless person.
Yeah, it was him actually. His name
Oh,
was
really? Oh,
Lodge.
that's
Yeah.
yeah. Clifton Collins. Yeah, Lodge the Vagrant. Right.
Almost unrecognizable, partially
Yeah,
because
I
the
was going
way
to
he's
say.
shot, and also he's mostly shot at night or in a
Right.
crowd scene. He's got a big bushy beard and
Yeah,
everything.
I did not know that it was him at all until when I got home and looked up stuff on IMDb.
Well, but he opens the film. He's wandering into town.
Right.
And you almost, if this was a Stephen King film, he'd be the one who's kind of bringing trouble into town. And it's sort of implied that maybe Joe Cross got COVID from him or something like that, because they
Right.
make a point of like, there's no COVID in Eddington.
Mhm.
But he comes in. He's a problem who has to be dealt with. The sheriff violently kind of addresses him when he goes into a bar that's also the unofficial political headquarters for the town because of lockdowns and stuff. But then later, in the almost exact middle point of the film, Joe Cross goes into that bar, finds Lodge behind the bar, like breaking glasses, yelling at himself and all this
Mhm.
stuff. Instead of arresting him, he just shoots him like twice in the chest, murders him point
Yep.
blank. And that's where the movie transitions into, okay, now Joe Cross is going up into the mountains, and with a scope, he's assassinating Ted Garcia and his 16 or 21-year-old son, I don't know,
Right.
in their home from long range. And then he's got to cover up the bodies, and then someone's hunting him and all this other stuff. But all the story that you're setting up in the first part of this movie just goes away. Now you could say that, well, that's how life is. It's what happens while you're making other plans, as John Lennon would say. But I'm not here for life. I'm here for a movie, and I don't appreciate
Mhm.
being set up for all this juicy stuff, only to have it be thrown away for a knockoff of a movie I loved, 13 years ago.
Well, and it's funny, comparing to other movies as we're watching this and getting more and more frustrated with it. Maybe because I've watched it twice in the last 2 weeks because it's the 50th anniversary of Jaws. But I kept thinking how if I was almost the Hollywood studio or whoever, gave Ari Aster the movie for this, I almost felt like I would have loved to have told him, watch Jaws again. because, well, it's a story about, okay, we've got this shark that for some reason is in our waters and we need to get rid of it. And it's this big monster kind of story. Obviously, it's a very tried and true sort of basics of, oh, monster in the town, we got to somehow get rid of it. Whether it's a vampire or Frankenstein or Wolfman, it's always some sort of beast, right? But if you look at what Jaws is also about, I mean, I think we've talked about this many times on your show, but I'll just share with your audience in case they haven't heard it from me. But the late great screenwriter William Goldman once said that a movie there's two things that are going on in every story. There's basically the A line or the top narrative, which would almost be the elevator pitch or the TV guide blurb. But what's the movie about? Okay, a shark somehow gets into the waters of Amityville and threatens the tourist season during the 4th of July weekend. And a sheriff and two other people decide to go hunt it to rid the town of. Okay, that's the plot. Great. What's the secondary through line in every scene in Jaws? And it's really about Chief Brody kind of getting his mojo back. And if you watch that after many, many years, as we all have, in almost every scene, the power is being taken away from him. And it starts with, okay, well, he is a fish out of water himself. He's from New York and he doesn't like the water. He doesn't know this town. What's the first thing his wife says to him? You're supposed to say, yeah, like she's correcting him. Like everybody is telling him, you're wrong about something. Are the beaches going to be closed? Yes, they are. Only 24 hours. I didn't agree to that. Those kind of things throughout, even when like, you got city hands, Mr. Hooper, you've been counting money all your life. Hey, I don't need this working class hero crap. You're not going to be like this on the boat, are you, Mr. Quint? He's like this guy who's kind of the, into the peacemaker or the quiet guy, or he's emasculated, or he's being pushed around by the city council and the mayor, or his wife is telling him even how to take care of the kids or whatever to say. Hooper drives the boat, Chief. Here's the chief, who's hired Quint, giving him 10 grand, and he's out chumming shit, right?
Yeah.
That could have been this thing, because it starts out almost like that. Like, here's this sheriff, and he seems like a decent fellow, and he seems kind and kind of low key and everything. But everywhere he turns, he's kind of getting thwarted. And, you could see it almost like, okay, my wife doesn't really like me anymore. And my mother-in-law is kind of breathing down my back. And then I'm having trouble breathing because I'm already asthmatic. And then I'm in the heat, which can't help. And now they're wanting to wear a mask, and it's difficult for me to breathe and or act authoritative when I'm sitting there fighting this and it's slipping down my nose. That's already better than most of what they set up here, because it's too much. And then what you do is you slowly turn this good man who's just trying to keep the peace and be quiet, get more agitated. And now I'm not saying he has to go into the killer that he becomes in this, but like he could, I was kept waiting for it because we're smart enough to know this now 5 years out, but the whole Black Lives Matter and the stridency of the teenagers here, if he was really smart, he could have said, if he was really a good sheriff paying attention to all this stuff, he said, the thing that made that so awful is that there's 3 cops stand around. This one guy is just picked up for possibly passing a counterfeit 20, even though he may be an unsavory sort, or they know him from that neighborhood or whatever, but they're pinning his neck down, and it just seems like an overreaction. And then, of course, the other cops overreacting by not reacting at all to it made them look terrible. But the defense now is like, that isn't every police force. You do not defund the police. They are there to protect us. Now, some of these people are bad, and there's many instances of that. And, because we've got video cameras on and cell phones and everything that have cameras, that stuff records. But wouldn't it have been more interesting if Joe Black had said, hey, I've been a very kind person here. You trust us. In fact, we just had a benefit that you raised money for us, and it was all good. But he never makes that argument. Instead, it's just like, well, I have no authority here. It's all just chaos. I can't even talk. No, show him a good man trying. Like Brody is trying in Jaws, even though he's been told the beaches are open. He's on that beach watching. Can he prevent little Alex Kinder from getting killed on the raft? No, but he's there. And I kept thinking this sheriff should be more proactive. He should more be saying, no, don't do this. Let's, when he first gets to that scene of the protest, the one guy is complaining, they broken my windows. Well, yeah, of course, people did start breaking windows and all that when there were 20,000 or 10,000 or 5,000 protesters. Here you've got 20 and they broke the window. Why didn't he go up to the person who said, who broke the window? Why did you break the window? That isn't helping anything here. He didn't do anything against George Floyd or anything else. It should be a smarter film 5 years after. for some of these issues, even if they were raw at the time, and maybe he's trying to exemplify that. It doesn't feel smart. This man does not feel like a sheriff. He doesn't feel like he's got control over anything. And then he turns into this, crazy sort of angry vengeance is my name kind of Batman Rambo for whatever reason. It's like, who is this person? Why is he sheriff? He comes from a long line and a code. I mean, Tommy Lee Jones is trying to do things by the book. Anton Sugar isn't.
Yeah.
The Josh Brolin character isn't either. So he's out of sorts. That's why there's no Country for Old Men. The old style of school of being disciplinarian and law abiding doesn't work anymore. So he retires. There's themes in better films that Aster could have taken here.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to unpack there.
I'm sorry, it was a long tirade, but I'll shut up now.
no, it's just because again, this could be a 7-hour conversation, but it would, I think, mostly be about 2020 and not this movie. And I think that's one of the things we've talked about Superman and Jaws and real world 2020 implications, and not so much about Eddington. And that's because this movie it feels incomplete. I feel like someone is going to make a 2020 movie. It might take a few different directors and iterations to get there, but someone's going to make a really good one. And this is sort of like, this movie is going to walk or stumble, considering it made $4 million opening weekend, so that something else can run. But I like what you're saying about Joe Cross. Again, if this were a mini series, then you could have May, June, July of 2020. Maybe condense the timeline a bit, because I feel like it happened over a little bit further time, but you started having these defund the police conversations. And it's like, okay, what if they cut off the budget for the sheriff's department? And then by December, you've got, chaos and crime explodes in the sleepy little town of Eddington because, you told the cops to go home. So they did, because that's what happened a lot in a lot of these major cities that had this, kind of political activism.
Or they just backed off. They backed off because they were afraid of making anything worse. You had
lots of cops resigning because the political structures of those various cities and towns sided with the defund the police people, at least in principle. So like, all right, I guess you don't need us anymore. And there are some people who stayed. So again, that's something else you could play with. The cops who stay versus the ones who want to leave. Is there any give and take there? But as far as this, story, I feel like Aster, to your point, plays it kind of evenly in the beginning of this, with the whole like kind of mask ridiculousness, but then the overall, we just didn't know, or some people didn't know. But then by the end of the film, when you see what he does with the character of Brian, who is I'm just going to call him a teenage boy, because I don't believe any of these teenagers, these protester kids, are like 20 or 21.
And they're all just hanging around at home,
Well, which I guess they would do if, during, quarantine times, but
right.
Yeah, they haven't left town. I don't know if that's because they couldn't go to college or whatever, but they just all seem like teenagers. And I don't know if that's just because I'm getting old and everybody looks like me.
That's funny.
Brian is the one who is interested in the radical girl. I don't know who she is.
Her name is Sarah in the movie.
Oh, Sarah, that's right.
Yeah,
Amelia Hefferly.
That's right.
Not familiar with her work, but so she is, she doesn't want to give him the time of day because she's interested in Eric Garcia, who's Mayor Garcia's son, as we established. Right. And part of that, I feel like, is because Brian is white. He's trying to be an ally and all this other stuff, and she keeps giving him the third degree about like, well, you can't just be an ally, you have to be a super ally and anti-racist or whatever, and you're part of the problem. But Eric is the kind of mysterious ethnic kid, and they end up like making out and he sends a selfie to Brian to kind of rub it in his face, and that sort of sets him off. But at the end of this film, when Joe Cross is going through town with that, I'm not a gun guy. I don't mind guns, but I don't know them. So I can't tell you what this mounted machine gun thing that he was carrying, like he's the Terminator all throughout town, like blasting at phantoms, essentially. In the end, Brian comes out and shoots the person who was attacking Joe Cross, and other cops show up, and take him in, but he's like, I'm the hero, I saved the sheriff or whatever. He becomes a minor celebrity, but it's very clear that Ari Aster wants us to connect him with Kyle Rittenhouse. He's on the podcast with Marjorie Taylor Greene and James Woods.
Yeah.
And you don't really get to see or hear what he's saying, because I feel like there's a music montage playing over it. But it's very much in that kind of same vein. So he gets this celebrity, but to tie him to a real world example, but to not portray the character in the movie as doing those exact things. But the situation that happened in Wisconsin was very different than what happened.
Very different, yeah.
Because there were actually people out in the street doing things, unlike in this movie where there's like maybe a couple of phantom guys in black who might be Antifa, there might be somebody else that are shooting at the sheriff. Who knows? It's very confusing. But then at the end, because Joe got messed up during this altercation, he ends up being kind of like a quadriplegic Stephen Hawking kind of
awful
character, who the mother-in-law ends up becoming a politico who is managing his, not even a campaign, but just his stature. I don't know if I can't remember.
I think he becomes mayor at the end, doesn't he? Even though he's basically unable to assume his job, it's because, but I'm not. They've rushed that too. There's a lot of information just thrown at us very quickly there at the end. But keep going, because yeah, I mean, again, I just think it's just too much going on in all that, you know.
Well, but the whole thing is, you're right. I believe he becomes mayor. They kind of glaze over it. He's there at the sort of the ribbon cutting of this new data center, which the corporation wins, and the mother-in-law is now all dressed to the nines, whereas before we'd see her
got a nice big house, new house, and everything. Yeah.
But every time we've seen her up until this point, she is a rambling nut conspiracy theorist who's like walking around in baggy, dirty sweatpants and house clothes, and she is unpolished whatever, and now all of a sudden she's Hillary Clinton or something. But at the end of the film, Joaquin Phoenix's character is basically loaded up into a bed, and she gets in the bed next to him, and then the orderly who's been taking care of him comes in, and they start like snuggling, and we're meant to think that, oh, that's the side piece. I don't know if Aster is trying to make fun of everybody. And just as we had a Kyle Rittenhouse allegory, we have a sort of a Joe Biden allegory where we've got the puppet mastress who's got the leader who is, you know, becoming a vegetable or something, but they're trying to hide it from the public. But that's not even true, because he's out there in the hawking wheelchair during the press conference and all that stuff. Now, whatever you feel about Biden and his decline, you know, I've got certain thoughts about it going all the way back to 2019. So the last 5 years have been very amusing for me. But the thing is, Aster keeps picking these things almost like ripped from the headlines, but after only reading the headlines and not diving any deeper, and then throwing this into his melange of a terrible script to say, hey, I'm skewering both sides. I'm like, no, you're not really saying anything.
Well, not only is he, I think, wanting to eat his cake and have it too, where he's, I'm an equal opportunity offender here because I'm taking down all the way everybody has overreacted on both sides for the last, I don't know, decade of political maelstrom. But he's not even doing it accurately. Like you said, if this guy is supposed to be Kyle Rittenhouse, that isn't the story of Kyle Rittenhouse. And it's a little bit easy to say, well, that's our kind of like Kyle Rittenhouse. Like, not really here. It's a little bit different than that. And again, I think if you're going to do those kind of satires, you have to be a little more tight to what the actual what you took away from that was, or who that person really was in the context. I think this movie is missing a lot of context. I mean, if it was done about like, okay, here's this sleepy little bird. It's already been a little under the duress. And it's one of the reasons that, frankly, everybody wants this new company to come in, because it's going to create jobs and it's going to make it a boom town. And there's going to have, I mean, I saw my small town of Lamira go from 700 people when I was in high school into like, I think it's 4,000 people now, because they put in a Quad Graphics, which was a printing factory, which is this big conglomerate where they print everything from, flyers and magazines to, banners and all kinds of materials that are going out throughout the world.
Link in the
And
description. No.
exactly. There you go. There you go. But I mean, so there seems to be a negativity towards like somehow this is a bad thing, when actually a town like that would be very much wanting something like that. And if the sheriff's in over his head because he isn't able to handle, the bigger problems that are coming, then they have to be shown as real problems. They should be political problems. They should be city problems. Instead, they're putting George Floyd on this, or they're putting the Me Too rape thing of his opponent, who just it's a little convenient with Ted Garcia. And then, even Ted Garcia at one point slaps Joaquin Phoenix when he comes to this party he's having and tells him to turn the music down. And again, where's Joe Black saying like, hey, I'm sorry to be here. I know this is not about your political campaign, but people are complaining about the noise in the town. Turn down the stereo. Now, if he doesn't have the authority to say that, and he should have, but he doesn't, and to say, hey, when I come in, I'm telling you to turn down your stereo, and you have to understand at the end of the day, that is my job, even if I'm your opponent, then I don't know what, because then nobody's saying anything. Nobody's smart enough to talk. Nobody's smart enough to actually converse with each other. Maybe that's Aster's point. I don't buy that here. It's like, have these characters be a little bit smarter, but the circumstances swirling around them, radically actually when they start off in the Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, they talk like a neighborhood, like people who know each other and like each other. And even the Claude Akins character, I don't remember, he's the voice of reason. He's like, oh, come on, Charlie, that isn't really what's going on. Or, oh, now let's not jump to conclusions. There's no voice of reason in here. Joe should be that voice of reason, and he's not. He's too quiet. He's too passive. He's too, embarrassed by his wife, so he doesn't say anything. And then when he does try to say something, he doesn't use the authority he's got. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. He should be a good man who's brought to the brink, or a good sheriff brought to the brink by all this excess. Instead, he can't handle the stuff that's just in front of him now.
Right. And I don't know, again, if Aster is trying to make some kind of a comment about people who might be like Joe Cross, because he is, particularly leading up to the murder and the double assassination. He is, kind of timid, and he's constantly emasculated. And that slap, the double slap was quite shocking.
Right. Yeah.
And then as he leaves, like the last person he sees as he's getting to his car is the kind of the business mogul guy that is behind the campaign for Ted Garcia, that his picture is up on the truck with Ted Garcia.
And he's going to bring in the business, the big,
right. And you see him just kind of like standing there, just kind of like, smirking, like, yeah, what do you think? Yeah. And then it's almost a great like little visual gag that in a real movie I would have very much appreciated, as he's pulling out, because the sheriff's main truck has been done up with this political campaign, poster boards and speakers. The top part of it gets hit by a tree branch and kind of collapses behind him, which says a lot visually about where his campaign and his life are going. Right. I'm like, okay, how is he going to come back from this? Like, I want to see this real dig in, let's get dirty political battle against the backdrop of COVID. But what happens? No. Joe, I think I saw this movie 2 days ago and I'm already forgetting it. So was that the moment that led to him going to the bar, like, and then shooting the guy, and then we're off,
and then from that he goes off to kill Ted Garcia and his son, which is even worse. Like, does the kid need to be killed too? I guess just as part of the whole situation. And then he also spray paints the word, I forget what the words were on the wall, to make it look like it's
like
some
Antifa
sort of,
or something.
Yeah, something like that, to make it set up somebody bad for it. And then of course he allows his black deputy to be set up, and again, is Joe that immoral? Did he really go off the rails because of one or two things? I mean, wouldn't it have been more interesting if he was okay? He doesn't have a happy home life. The mother-in-law is a problem too. He feels put upon because he's the sheriff, and yet he sometimes can't breathe and raise his voice with authority. And now he's got to wear the mask, which he doesn't want to, and everybody's telling him to wear the mask. And what are his options? He's got many options. First of all, he's the sheriff. He is the authority. Why doesn't he talk to Ted Garcia about it? Why don't we see any of those things where he's talking to people about, like, what do we know about this? Why do we have to do this? Or what do we, is there something more that he would be helping people find out about if the AI center is good or not? But no, we immediately default to him. Well, he's a man and he's been emasculated, and he's going to use this big high-powered weapon to basically, become his appendage and shoot people. And then at the end, he's even got a bigger appendage because now he's got the machine gun. It's like,
Jeff, that's exactly it.
That's the symbolism.
At the second half of this movie, Joe Cross becomes everything that the protesters in town think that he is.
Yeah.
He's the guy who's in authority. He is corrupt. He'll use violent means to get his way.
Mm-hmm.
But the first part of the movie is not that. And I don't buy that he snaps or that slap would do it to him, because I don't know that much about him. We've got so much stuff like Austin Butler, who I think is really good in this movie.
Very good. In fact, I think other than Joaquin Phoenix in the first hour, I think gives probably the best performance in it, because he's very persuasive as that guy. Like you know exactly who that guy is, and he's only got that 10-minute scene, but it's a very, very good scene.
He's the Mr. Terrific of this movie.
Yeah, really. It's like best supporting performance.
And also, if they ever make a movie about a youngish Johnny Depp, they got to get Austin Butler to do it, because he's totally channeling Johnny Depp in that.
Yeah.
But Aster is very politically confused, and if he's not, then he's not doing a good job of getting his thoughts across, because I feel like Joe Cross during the second part of this movie is meant to be like the stand-in for the small town conservative sheriff who's just gonna, like you said, use the extendage of his appendage to blow stuff up because he loves guns and he hates them Antifers and all this other stuff. But then at the end, you kind of turn him into, again, if I'm going by these mixed allegories, a sort of a Biden-esque figure. So I'm like, Ari, what are you trying to say? Did you scribble all this stuff down and then just roll action, or was there an outline of a message here? I'm not necessarily a fan of messages in movies, but I do prefer it if there is a message that is clear and I know where the filmmaker is coming from. Here, it just felt like he was reading, the Time magazine, the year that was 2020, and just like going through memes and things.
See, I think what would have been interesting, if you're going to make a political film like this, I think you go back to what happened and sort of the fallout from that. And sure, it leads into here we are in 2025 and X, Y, and Z about certain things. But he had an opportunity to show, sort of this small community that is already got a little bit of problems on its own and trying to figure it out. And then it's all exacerbated by these other sort of outside elements, which unfortunately affect them a little bit too. But everybody was affected by COVID sort of in some way with the mandates for masks and the lockdown and some of those kind of things for those months. But, it would have been an interesting thing. They are a small community, and in small communities people know each other a little bit more because they're the only people they see. And if it's a less than 200 people in a town as this is presented as, wouldn't they know each other a little bit better? Could they find common ground? I mean, I'm not saying he has to be Pollyanna about it, but realize that some of this isn't helpful. Some of this isn't good, and maybe the mayor or maybe the sheriff are more persuasive. Shows that they're actually worthy of being in those roles, but they don't demonstrate anything that makes either one of them seem like, okay, this is a mayor who has to listen to 200 different people, or this is a sheriff who has to know the bylaws of what he can and cannot do, and immediately defaults to, okay, I'm now going to break the law and set up people because I'm not even willing to stand up for my beliefs because I have to do them in the shadows. There was an opportunity, I think, here for Aster to do something bigger than that. He could still have some fun with it. Like maybe just if they kind of get back to sort of a little bit normal, maybe if you say 6 months later or a year later, and they're kind of, hey, we like this. It's people are making money now. They're getting new homes, or it's good for the economy, blah, 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 blah. The sheriff died or whatever, for whatever reason, but his deputies are trying to be better men, just like he's holding the portrait of his dad lit, the only thing that stays lit every night in his home. And then there's something else that comes up. So it tests them all over again. We kind of have to remind ourselves that, yep, it always resets, and everything is a test in our world, whether it's from, happenstance or politics or God or whomever you want to qualify as putting obstacles in our way. But I just think this is cynical. It's all over the map. they're more like two-dimensional characters who I don't think really believe anything because I couldn't get a hold of who they are. I mean, I thought I knew who Joaquin Phoenix character was at first, but not by the end of it. It's like, who's this? He starts out as this milquetoast quiet guy, and now he's Rambo who knows how to shoot all these weapons and avoid getting hit and take out this and that and the other thing. And, you know, suddenly he's, you know, like a Columbo murderer who's thought about how to kill the person for 10 minutes and looks like he got away with the perfect crime until the good lieutenant shows up. I just think it's sloppy storytelling, very unthorough characters. And I think almost he's laughing at us because I think he's just saying, America's fucked. We're terrible. We're awful. It's like, well, show the better angels somehow sneaking out of this.
Well, on top of this is like a nitpick, but it's a gripe that I have with a lot of these movies, particularly ones involving cops. I understand being a lawman and knowing how to use your sidearm. And I'll even buy that he can use a long range rifle to take out, you know, a couple of people from, you know, across the valley. But when he goes into that gun shop and then he comes out with, again, this giant Terminator weapon, and he's like using it, you know, it's scattershot because he's firing a lot, but he knows how to use it. Like, okay, I'm an artist, right? But it doesn't mean that I can animate Toy Story 5. That's right. It's this weird superpower that a lot of movie cops have, and it just drives me crazy. But yeah, you mentioned the portrait of his father that we keep coming back to in his home. In a non-cynical movie, I like what you're saying about, you know, if this were a happier movie, not saying it has to be happy, but at least not like you want to slit your wrist after it's over, but go back almost like the ending of Boogie Nights when you're kind of panning through the house and you see William H. Macy's portrait on the wall as you go past, you know, replace his father's portrait with one of him if he had died in the line of duty or something like that, you know, because they keep showing it to the point where you're like thinking, okay, this is going to mean something. It's almost the rule of three, but then it comes to nothing, much like a lot of the kind of the plot points in this movie. And I will disagree a bit because I think that Ted Garcia, the Pedro Pascal character, is interesting and pretty straightforward. And I like his character insofar as he is, you know, people seem to like him. He's got ads up everywhere. He's smiling. He knows how to press the flesh. You know, that scene in the grocery store, he is kind of the voice of reason with the sheriff who's kind of being unruly. He knows how to get people on his side and speak to what they want to believe. And the one kind of that I can recall shady moment is when he berates his son, but he does it in a way that me as a grown man who lived through 2020, I totally understand where he's coming from. Yeah. Because it can be seen as a politically kind of it's a lecture of convenience for his career, because his son is like, I'm going out to hang out with my friends, and he's like, you realize what would happen as the mayor's son if you're caught at a gathering? You know, he's like, I'm just going to go see Brian or whatever. He's like, fine, then just Brian. It better just be Brian. Don't let me find out it was another. That's fine, because he's not preventing him from going, but he's saying, look, I don't want you to get caught at a party because A, COVID, and B, this sends a message. You've got a responsibility. And being the mayor's son, he should know this, even if it's that teenage rebellion or whatever. And if it's not teenage rebellion because he's 21 or whatever, then it's even worse. But I was really looking forward to seeing where this character would go. Would there be other layers revealed to make him either an actual bad guy or just someone who's got a political difference with the sheriff, which I think would have been way more interesting. Another thing that doesn't pay off, and this will feed back, I promise, into what I was just talking about, that shopping mart scene where there's a disturbance, Cross gets called over, and there's this old man who wants to go into the store without a mask. He's like, I can't breathe in the mask. I just want to go get groceries. And the store owner's like, look, he can't come in because it's the law or whatever. And Cross comes in, he's like, it's not the law. It's a local ordinance or something. A law is blah, 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 blah. And I'm the sheriff and I can override this because, you know, basically it's not, you know, in the books. But he goes in, and then after he buys the guy's groceries, because the guy, I think he ends up getting kind of bullied out by some of the other employees anyway. Cross buys the dude's groceries and brings them out to him in the parking lot, and he's like, the old man's like, oh, I can pay you back next week, and Cross is like, don't worry about it. And the guy's like, well, can I at least get a picture with you? I'm like, aha, they're gonna take a selfie together. He's going to post on Facebook, and that's going to come back to harm Joe Cross during his mayoral run or something. And it's like, look, this guy's, he's a super spreader, or he's not encouraging people to be safe and all this other stuff. But no, that's the last we see of this thread. I'm like, why set all of that up to just completely drop it?
Well, and they go, to your point, they either go nowhere, or you're looking at it and thinking, is that what the sheriff would do? Would he say, well, I'll pay for your groceries? That's the answer. Okay, first of all, he's the authority on law. So if he says, no, that's not a law, it's an ordinance or a suggestion, there's lockdown, but look, there's 6 months, or this guy's there, or he could say, look, I've got trouble breathing too. Why don't you just go in and make sure that you're 6 feet away from people? I mean, there's ways that cops and authorities and even the mayor can do things. Like, for example, when Joe shows up at the party and the mayor slaps him. Really? The mayor would slap him. He's got all these supporters around all this, but that's where he is immature, and that's where he's not a leader. He's not a good man. And it's like, do something else. And Ari Aster, write a better scene for that. Like, have 3 minutes of dialogue, because Pedro Pascal and Joaquin Phoenix really don't have much to do in any scenes in this film where they're actually talking about it. Okay, now you've done this damage by calling me a rapist and saying and making about your ex-girlfriend and all this, but talk about it. I mean, I'm not trying to say, think about the people that Trump has had to go visit and get along with for a couple of hours, like Gavin Newsom or whatever they after the wildfires or things like that. But show me that he's a good politician. Show me that he's a good sheriff. Show me that he knows the law, and show me that people follow his authority. But they don't seem to have control over anything. And I'm saying there, neither of these men should be mayor. This sheriff really shouldn't be the sheriff. He doesn't have any real authority about anything. And he seems to be running around flibberty gibbet all the time. It's like, they're not even the characters you're supposedly writing. And if you're just trying to say, well, the police are all terrible and the politicians are all corrupt and crazy, and they do cornball-y commercials like the one that we see that Pedro Pascal's mayor does in this, make me follow characters that are just a little bit who you tell me they are, and they're a little smarter about letting us see that, oh, that's right. A man who's running for re-election as mayor would have 4 years of experience and be a little savvier or calming or cool-headed about stuff than to slap the sheriff in front of everybody. He would.
At a party where there's apparently the one event in the entire town in the slash movie where no one's got a phone. There's nobody recording that. There's no moment where he slaps the guy and says, oh, by the way, I need that phone. Or something like that. And I'm glad you brought that slap up, because that is I guess that's the one moment where we really see the mayor kind of like losing his cool and being more sinister. Right. Which I don't know. Again, I could see if this guy is being a nuisance and he's coming onto his property about this like noise complaint, he just comes in and kind of shuts the thing, turns the knob down or whatever. I don't know. There could have been more to that scene. There could have been a lot more between those two characters, again, to get into these details, but it's just a setup to say, okay, this is what pushed our hero over the edge. Now he's going to become the villain, and he's going to take out his enemy and his enemy's son. And we're not going to get any resolution, all that, because the movie becomes, quote unquote, about other things later on. It's just so frustrating, but I shouldn't be surprised, because the other two Ari Aster films that I've watched, I come out of them thinking this guy is a nihilist. I feel like he makes movies that should be about things, but doesn't really extract deeper layers out of it. And I'm constantly disappointed. And I'm also tired of having to proclaim I'm not quite there with Ari Aster yet. He's got one more movie, after which I'm going to say I'm done, because I haven't seen Beau is Afraid. I've heard mixed things about it, but it's also 3 hours long, so that's not something I'm eager to like catch up with. But he's got one more movie before I'm just like, Ari Aster is just not for me, and I just don't think he's a great film maker, but he needs to, much like James Gunn, get someone else to write his material.
He reminds me of, and it's getting close to this kind of for me in a way, some of these filmmakers who would be better off working with a co-screenwriter, somebody to kind of challenge their shit, or maybe even brings the script to it and they direct it. And they just look at it as, how do I direct this story and respond to it? generally Fincher doesn't write his scripts, but like when he did the Social Network, he sat down with Aaron Sorkin for 2 weeks before they even brought the actors in and said, I want to meet with you every day, and I just want to go through the script with you. And Aaron Sorkin thought, oh, this will be a couple hours, and then we'll bring the actors in. He goes, no, I'm going to do it with you he went through every word of that script because like, I love the script, but I want to know what you're thinking. Tell me how you came up with this line and why this character does this here, because I just want to know where your brain is at, because it's really smart. And I read the book that it was based on, but it's different here and it's not the same there, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's a thorough director. I think Ari Aster, who does have a filmmaker skill, he knows how to edit. He's good at act with the actors. But like to your point about those two previous movies, I thought Hereditary was 2/3 of a terrific movie. It was scary. It was weird. The family already had these weird tensions in there, and they were already kind of unraveling before the sort of sinister elements came into it full fury. And then they come into it full fury. So it almost obliterates all the stuff that he said in the 2/3. Like it didn't matter that the Toni Collette mother was kind of slowly but losing her mind. Hey, now she's possessed by the devil and she's breaking her neck and floating above the ground and having orgies with old people. What? That is not what you've set up for the first hour and a half of this movie, or even Midsommar. It's like, okay, so these guys are out there thinking, hey, we're bros and we're gonna have this fun time and it's all this. But as soon as those two old people sacrifice themselves jumping off, it's like, what are you doing now? But they're saying, well, we're going to probably leave in a couple of days. We're going to ask questions. You better be smarter than that. You better wake the hell up. But instead, they're just sitting ducks the whole time, and they're easy pickings, and they're all killed off, and nobody's leaving. Nobody's asking questions. There's no kind of plan. I mean, I keep thinking about, Sigourney Weaver and Aliens. It's like, okay, so we come in with all this artillery and we think that we're going to blast all these guys, but now there's 100 of these damn things around. What are we doing? Okay, here's the first thing. You get us out of there and you push the pedal to the metal and get out of here, rather than, oh, we've got to follow protocol and make these people, they ain't coming back. Okay, we got to save the people in your are. And she's doing that throughout, acting like a leader. I don't see people acting with the circumstances that Ari Aster is writing for them. Same here. It's like, okay, so now your opponent is the sheriff. What does that do to you as the mayor? Wouldn't it be better to get him to back off or like you and not become this big ugly thing? If you're a politician, wouldn't you be able to say, look, that's not what happened. I'm going to talk to him about it and all this. But no, everybody's just going to the crazy town, just like he did in those other movies. And I think he thinks that man is just crazy and they're waiting to go crazy. And I don't want to necessarily bring it back to Rod Serling again, but those people are running around shooting at each other, throwing bricks in the windows, and creating fires and craziness at the end of The Monsters That Are Due on Maple Street. The next morning when they're under arrest, they would wake up and go like, oh my God, I can't believe I did all that. We're here, Joaquin Phoenix just is like, there's no guilt any left anymore. He's now setting up his deputy. Doesn't mind setting up his deputy. Doesn't mind shooting the town to shit. And God knows if anybody's in any other store or nearby car or whatever else. He's just become this killing machine. What? This super sensitive guy who's afraid to even talk back to the cult leader who's clearly handing him a bill of goods, and yet he's kind of kind because like, I don't know if he's going to hurt me or, do something worse. I don't think Ari Aster is writing characters. I think he's writing conceits. And I think that's maybe serves the movie on some levels if it's a horror movie. But for something like this, where I think you have to have a certain amount of sympathy because he's representing us and the way we acted in 2020, it's got to be more empathetic or something.
Well, I like that word conceits there, because it's also it's tons of shorthand. It's tons of like kind of setup for either gags or almost like weird member berries for 2020. Case in point, the assassination scene. You see Ted Garcia in his house, and he's getting ready to watch TV. And as he walks across his living room, you see a brief shot. He's got the piles of like Costco toilet paper, right, piled up. And that's supposed to be like, oh, I remember that. But then you stop and think about it, like he's got a nice big house. I don't think he keeps the toilet paper in the living room unless it's something like he just got back from Costco and hasn't put it away. It's just like, have a scene like somewhere else in his house earlier on where he's talking to his son or something, he's putting it away or whatever. But I just don't buy that it's sitting there in his living room. If he's living in a crappy little apartment, then maybe, but like, no.
And it's also an easy symbol, like, oh, see, he's got the money to be a hoarder, and he's probably taking away toilet paper from people who need it because there isn't any left at the stores anymore. I mean, who knows what Ari Aster is trying to say there, but it's one of those little details that means probably in his mind, oh, see, I'm laughing at him because he's so panicky and, over responding to all this. But it's a throwaway gag, and it, to your point, doesn't really make sense in the sense of this man's house and the way he lives and what we can see from his furnishings. Again, that's a conceit. That isn't a character's moment there that tells us anything about that character. It just is like, see how that funny was? We all were running out of toilet paper because everybody panicked and went and got, potatoes and toilet paper and eggs.
Well, and it's funny because in December of 2019, that's when I first heard about COVID-19, because I was one of those people that was watching like weird stuff on YouTube, and a couple of people that I was watching, you can call them right-wing political commentators if you want, because frankly that's what they were. They were talking about something going on in China, and it was a story that hadn't made it over to the US. And like, something scary is going on over there. I recommend you stock up on things like, soup and paper towels and toilet paper.
Yeah.
And when I did my first show of the pandemic, which was in March of 2020, it was a movie about, oh my gosh, why can't I think of the movie? It was called Quarantine Movies, but it was the Matt Damon Contagion. Yes, that was
Steven
Soderbergh's movie, right? It was kind of like a funny thing, like, hey, work just sent me home for a week, and I had like, I think, toilet paper and soup and stuff like piled up around me as kind of like a set piece. But that stuff I bought months ago because I had heard something weird was coming, and sure enough. So the thing is, with this movie, there is no balance. You get a lot of the stuff you hear about people reading things online, it's all the wildest of the wild conspiracy theories, but there's no point of view of like, hey, I watch stuff, I pay attention, I'm a normal person, something strange happened, so I got a little bit prepared, and wouldn't you know what happened. So what kind of an interesting conversation would that be to have, for a film? Because I saw it when I watched people like rioting and stuff in Costco's, and when I would go to stores, and I still have photographs I would take because I cannot believe the shelves are empty. Like, that messed with a lot of people's psychology in a way that can really be explored, and some rich drama mined from that. At no point did I think I'm going to get a giant Gatling gun and run through the town.
Well, and to your very point about that, see, this is going back to a little bit of what I mentioned earlier too, is I have more sympathy for a lot of the, whatever you want to call it, panic and some of the fears and stuff, we didn't know. And, when you hear things like that, it's like, wow, what are we doing? Then people say like, well, maybe the supply chain won't be as good, or there might be this. And, I mean, I know that people stock up on all kinds of products just for all kinds of reasons, and who would have thought that paper would be the one? But I sympathize with that, and they could have portrayed that here, or even to your point about, this movie just shows all the crazy both ends, that they're scrolling and finding on TikTok and YouTube and stuff. But how about the fact that from day to day, we sometimes are given contradictory information, and we didn't know what was going on, and we couldn't get a beat on it. And I can sympathize with that, because who knows? We didn't know then. And we were trying to err on the side of being overly cautious, and maybe it went on too far. But at the same time, there were some people who are saying, oh, this is going to be over in a couple of weeks, and then it wasn't. And then 1 million people are dying worldwide, and we're still talking about bleach and 100 other things. And it's like, but I mean, at the same time too, we also forget that between the two administrations handling COVID towards the very end, we came up with the antidote. And we could still be sitting here in lockdown if it became worse and 20 million people died in the world, because we hadn't found an antidote yet. So there is goodness in people, and there was some real smart maneuvers during all this, even when maybe people were being overly cautious or a little bit flaky about certain things. But this movie just wants to ridicule it all. And I know that, that works in it's a mad world. But I think this isn't about a single thing like, okay, all these normal people are going to suddenly act greedy for this bag of cash in mad world. Here it's like, there's all this stuff going on, and where's the pity for these people? I think they're all turned into caricatures.
Yeah, I feel like you need to make a serious drama, or go completely far out and make a satire, but a satire that can play sort of across the aisle. And you don't achieve that just by name checking. Here's a crazy thing the right said, and here's a crazy thing the left said, and kind of bouncing back and forth. But
Right.
why were they thinking that? What does it mean? Who ended up coming out on top of a certain point of view, or a certain aspect of this versus another? What's that shifting dynamics? Because you're right, the sands were shifting constantly, during that time. So there are some people who say the whole thing was ridiculous. I never washed my groceries. I washed my groceries, partially because, my wife said, "Hey, I watched the thing on the news. We should
Hey,
wash our groceries." Like, this is kind
exactly.
of silly, but you know what? You're living with someone who has a point of view about something, and it's not a deal breaker. So it's like, well, maybe, I don't know. It seems silly to me, but the CDC says or whoever says you should wash down your groceries. There are certain things that I did do and didn't do. But I feel like if I'm going to see a movie that purports to be about what happened in this small town in 2020, because it's so fresh and so many, it's not like you're talking about
Mhm.
something that happened 40, 50 years ago and everybody's dead.
Right.
This is something we all went through. And
Mhm.
I feel like to go to a movie and watch it present such bullshit that stops halfway through without really coming up with any
Mhm.
answers or questions, frankly, is just kind of insulting. And I'm not surprised this movie isn't catching people. Um, I don't want to see Ari Aster fail, but I'm also like, let's get this out of the way and pave the ground for someone to come along and really do something with this story.
Right. I also am not sure what the point of a movie is if you're going to sort of play everything sort of to ridicule both sides, when I don't think either side on some of those arguments are worthy of that ridicule. For example, like, okay, they're protesting Black Lives Matter. Well, they do, and very oftentimes because 100 reasons, and going back to, maybe, as they say in this movie a number of times, original sin and all that kind of stuff, that there's a lack of empathy or understanding of it. And yet at the same time, the sheriff could be using his power to say, I'm not that cop who's done that. We haven't done that here. Let's be reasonable about this. Let's not make that about everything else that's a problem, or that problem in Minneapolis, which is sometimes happens with certain cops. And we know it goes on, but it's not going on here in this town. Let's be a little bit more civil about it and not break that man's windows. I would think that a sheriff who's good, or even a politician who's like the mayor, would somehow have that response. I've heard it many times from presidents and mayors and governors when there's, hurricanes and looting and different things like that. It's not like everybody's like, well, I'm just siding with my side and you people are the problem on the other side. There is common ground, but you don't feel any of that here. And the people who could be orchestrating that have no interest in doing it, which I think is just, it's easy to say, oh, the mayor's bad, the sheriff's bad, everybody's screwed up. It's like, I think if there were more recognizable humans on here, I think it would work better, because then you'd empathize with them going through these crazy, outlandish things that we all did in 2020.
You know what the blueprint for this story is? This is gonna sound strange, but it's the bank run scene from It's a Wonderful Life. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
Joe Cross should have
Yep.
been George
Right,
Bailey,
right,
the guy who never left town,
right.
loves the people, has kind of ambitions for doing something bigger, but feels tied to his community. And then the Great Depression hits, and there's a run on the bank, and
Mhm.
he goes in there and he's like, "Look, I can pay all you folks out, but we can't shut this thing down. We just need to
Right,
stick together." And there's almost a riot. And they're like, "I want all of my money out now." He's like, "Look, just how much do you need to get through this week? Let's
right,
stick
right.
together, because otherwise, Potter wins." If there'd been that sort of an attitude with
Mhm.
COVID or with the BLM protests, or any one of these kind of, attendant issues, I think you really could have dug in and done something with this movie and still have, your dark ending, or if you want to do that, but why not do something aspirational? I think the reason is because Ari Aster, frankly, based solely on his art, does not believe in the dignity or the possibility of righteousness within the human spirit, which is why, again, he's got one more for me, and then I'm just going to move on to someone else. But
Yeah. It's one
but
thing to be nihilistic, but at some point, if you're presenting people, even if they devolve into that, I think you have to show them as being capable of being brought back from the brink. And in those movies that we talked about, even Florence Pugh's character at the end of Midsommar she's just like, she's crying and she's sort of given into it. It's like, really? You're so smart and plucky throughout the thing, and yet you just give into it and become the flower princess of the. I just don't know. I just, who is that person? What are we saying here? Now, there's other places in movies in 60s and 70s where, at the end of, Catherine Ross loses at the end of the Stepford Wives. Warren Beatty doesn't expose the parallax view. He's he gets getting shot. But Robert Redford gets away with it at the end of 3 Days of the Condor. I like that better than the parallax view, because he somehow had a little bit of righteousness on him, and he was smarter than the bad guys going after him by and large. I wanted somebody in this movie, one person in those other movies, to just be a little smarter and not just, oh, they're all just steamrolled by this terrible world of cults or COVID or whatever. Ugh.
You know what Ari Aster is? And I'm going to coin a word here, Jeff.
Oh, I love it.
He is juvenilistic.
I love it. That's very good.
He's a child who hates everything.
That's very good. Juvenilistic. I like it. I really do. We should have like posters with the negative best lines on them.
Well, all right. We are way over time here. So but that's what these movies and these conversations do to me, Jeff. I just want to talk forever. And I really appreciate you hanging out and exploring Eddington. I think there's a lot more we could have gotten into, but honestly, what's the point? I feel like people are going to watch this movie and they're going to catch it eventually, and they're going to wonder what was all the hype about. I feel like when people talk about Ari Aster, they're still going to be talking about Midsommar and, more importantly, Hereditary. Movies that I didn't agree with, but I think are in their own way landmark films, and this Eddington is just not one of those.
I think you're right, and I think he needs to start thinking about, as a filmmaker, what would another person's idea bring to the table with him. He can work with them. I mean, I'm sure Spielberg and Scorsese work with their screenwriters, but very rarely do they write the whole thing themselves. I think it's just getting high in your own supply. You need a little bit of distance from it. You need somebody to say, that's good, but I think this would be better. Yeah.
Agreed. Well, Jeff York of The Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists, who I failed to introduce at the beginning of the show.
Oh, that's all right. That's okay. They know me by now.
Yes. All your information is down below in the description. And I definitely appreciate you again hanging out. And we will be talking again very soon about another blockbuster movie coming up. Hopefully it's fantastic.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Is that foreshadowing there?
Dude, you one-upped me on my own show. Horrible.
Sorry.
All right. Well, folks out there, if you liked this show, please like and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, all that business. Be sure to support Jeff in all of his endeavors, as linked down below. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you very much and take care. Hey everyone, Ian here. I know, long time no see, but if you like the video you just watched, feel free to subscribe to Kicking the Seat right here, and also check out the playlist and recommended video right here. Thanks for watching.